Hey everyone, welcome back to You Are What You Love. I'm your host, Marissa Tandon, and today's episode is part 2 of last week's conversation with writer and director Alexandra Tandon about the 90s hit TV show Charmed. If you haven't listened to part 1, be sure to head back to the last episode and catch up before starting this one. If you're all caught up, enjoy the rest of our chat about how 3 magical sisters shaped Alexandra's taste in media, understanding of womanhood, and her favorite love stories from the show.
Fictional characters are great. The people who play them sometimes aren't.
Yeah.
And it's really easy, at least for me, to have a person ruin who they play on TV.
Mm-hmm.
So the less I know, the better, honestly, in those situations. So I don't really go hunting for a lot of like behind the scenes or like what was happening on set type of deal.
Yeah, I feel like you and I have talked about this 1,000 times, which is like the idea of a movie star got killed with the like desperation to be known that has been created by social media.
Yeah.
And it's not like I don't want to know. Like
I think it also comes down to people just like freely volunteering information that nobody needs to know.
Yeah.
Like when all of those celebrities came out and they were like, yeah, I don't shower and I don't bathe my children. Like I didn't ask and I don't want to know. Like literally no one asked.
Yeah.
And no one wants to know that. But now I know that you and your kids run around stinky. Like that's not okay. So, I think it's just the less I know, the better. Like, I don't want to, like, obviously, I'm not in my mind, like, oh, this celebrity is my friend or whatever. So it's like ruined that aspect. But it's just like, I'm not going to listen to your music if I find out you're a piece of trash. Like,
yeah.
I've got to now, every time I listen to your songs, I got to think about how much you suck. Like, come on. So it's just, I just want to know the least amount possible about anybody out there that is not like a personal friend of mine. Like, I don't need to know because you for sure have done something in your past to get to the level that you are at now that I'm not gonna like. So I don't want to know about it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it's essentially like what you're saying is even if you're a good person, you're still a person.
Yeah.
So like you're gonna hear something that makes you go, ooh.
Sometimes the way social media is today, you're actively like you're watching things as they happen as well. And you'll be watching things play out and you're like, dear God, man, just stop. Like it just gets terrible. Like there are so many like beef interactions that happen over TikTok or like Instagram Live or whatever the hell. And it's just like, I think everybody needs to throw their phone in the trash and we need to just stop because we are giving the world information that is not necessary to know. And now I can't listen to the music I like. Like it's just bad.
Yeah, I agree. So that's interesting. Like, so you probably haven't watched a lot of like interviews with the Charmed cast or things like that. You really just like to let it exist as its own thing.
Yeah, because also like let's be real, these people were famous in the 90s.
Sure.
They're problematic. Like there's just no way they're not. So there's been, actually like I remember what's her name? Holly Marie Combs, who plays Piper on the show, tweeted after the Oscar slap thing and I was like, okay, I like can't look at that. So it was just like you're not going to ruin this for me. Like
that's fair. So something that I think is interesting is that you yourself have become a writer and you've written lots of good stuff. And so
it's all good. It's never not good.
And so like I'm curious, like as this is a show that was sort of forming your brain, like sort of forming storytelling to you while your brain was still forming.
Yeah. You can also say it was forming my brain. It is deep in there.
Yeah, forming your brain, just sort of mushing it all together.
Yeah.
Getting them those grooves, them squishy little lines.
Yep.
I'm curious if there's like a storytelling aspect that from the show really stuck with you or like a storyline or something that you think was just really impactful to you as a person and maybe the way you tell stories yourself.
Yeah, I think I don't know if it comes up too much in my like own storytelling. I think definitely Charmed impacted the stories that I was interested in telling. Like, All in My Head was my first show that I did on my own and obviously like the content of it is supernatural and I think I probably wouldn't have been um drawn to that aspect of things without watching Charmed because I think it was the first thing that like really drew me into that world. But I think and I don't really write like romance or anything, but it is what I'm interested in, like reading most of the time. And I think that I really enjoyed the like romantic plots of Charmed and that they were done pretty well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite one that you think is quite good?
Well, I think the 2 big ones are Piper and Leo and then Cole and Phoebe, and, um, I think Cole and Phoebe is like, Piper and Leo are, like, definitely a really good one, but I think Cole and Phoebe are probably my favorite as far as the length of their love story and, like, how up and down it was and, like, it's a tragic love,
Sure.
whereas Piper and Leo, they had breaks and they had moments where they weren't able to be together and everything, but at the end of the day, it all worked out.
Mhm.
And I think sometimes a tragic love story is a lot more interesting to watch play out, and even every time I rewatch it knowing it's gonna end in flames, like, I still really enjoy watching it.
Mm. You still enjoy the chaos of it.
Yeah.
Even though you know it's gonna end in heartbreak?
Yeah.
Something's still very good about it?
Yeah. I think really what it is that Cole, when he comes into the show, his the reason why he's there is to kill Phoebe, actually. So, Cole is half demon, half human, and he's, evil, and he's, like, a big bad guy, and he's supposed to be, like, the Source's, like, main I don't know what you would call it, not necessarily his right-hand man, but, like, the
Like
dude that he sends out to
like
get
a
shit done.
henchman?
Yeah, a henchman, like, a hit guy.
Yeah.
And so he's, like, a favorite of the source of all evil, so he's obviously, like, a big bad guy. And he comes in and his job is to kill the charmed ones. And to do that, you really only have to kill one of them because
Mhm.
then they're not as strong as they once were, and then, the rest can be picked off, but as long as you get one, the power of 3 is no longer, "That's what we're trying to accomplish here," type of deal.
'Kay.
So he comes in and Phoebe is automatically drawn to him, so she kind of becomes the easy target, and I think that is true for the entire show that Phoebe's the easy target, because of who she is as a person, but also because she's the one who doesn't have an active power, so she's the easiest to get to. So Phoebe's the easiest to get to because of who she is kind of as a person, she's, like, very open and trusting, and I think she's also the youngest of the sisters at that point. She finds out later that she's the middle sister when they find Paige, but
Mm.
she didn't come into play at that point. So I think, like, by nature of her being, like, the baby of the family and, like, being a very, like, lovesick person
Mhm.
and also, like, being the one with, like, the shittiest power, she was just, like, the easiest target,
Yeah.
but he's so drawn to her that he ends up falling in love with her and actually has literally every single opportunity under the sun to kill her and can never bring himself to do it.
Mhm.
So I think part of what is really interesting about their love story that Piper and Leo don't have is that you actually watch Cole become human because he loves her.
Mm.
So, and literally as well, because he actually gives up his powers and becomes human because he wants to be with her.
Oh, wow.
And it happens so many times throughout their love story that, like, he's evil and she's good and it can never work. And then, like, Phoebe becomes evil a couple of times because of how in love with him she is. But, like, in my opinion, Phoebe was turning evil, like, every other Tuesday. So, it was, it actually she turned evil once before Cole even came to the show.
Mhm.
She was under the influence of some, like, demon type thing, but it wasn't out of the norm for her to turn evil. So a lot of people have differing opinions about Cole and Phoebe, which I didn't find out until the whole TikTok of it all, but, um I love him, but basically, Cole, when he first meets her, is evil. He kind of turns good because of his love for her, and when they find out that Cole is the demon that has been after them trying to kill them, they're like, "Obviously, we have to kill him now." But because Phoebe's so in love with him, she can't do it. So she helps him fake his death from her sisters, and then, um, you know, essentially, in her mind, gives up on their love and is like, "I'm never gonna see him again, but at least I know he's out there and I didn't have to kill him." And then he comes back because he loves her so much.
Mhm.
And they have to, get through this whole thing of her sisters being like, "No, he's evil, we have to kill him," and him being like, "I'm not gonna use my powers," and it goes back and forth, and there's a lot of times where he's good for a while and everything's great, and then something happens and either by influence of another demon or, like, circumstances, like, he's pushed to do something evil, and him and Phoebe have to break up because he's now gone back to the dark side or whatever. And she can never let him go, and the same for him. So they're always coming back to each other in a way that their really their love is also a battle between good and evil. And Cole's turning good and evil a lot of the time. Phoebe's turning evil and going back to good a lot of the time. And eventually it all has to end because the truth of the matter is that Cole was born evil and he's kind of always fallen into that. And she can't save him.
Mm.
Um, but I think what is so like tragic about the whole thing is that you really do feel like they belong together because of how much they love each other, and also those two people just have, like, amazing chemistry on screen as well, but they go through so much, and every time that you think that they're done, something else happens. So, like, Cole eventually finally gets his powers, his demon powers stripped, and then he just, like, doesn't know who he is anymore because he's lived for hundreds of years with these powers and everything, and he was once able to protect Phoebe from all of these different demons and monsters and stuff that are coming in, and now she has to protect him because he's human, he doesn't have any powers. He's the easiest to kill in the house now.
Mhm.
And, they wanna get married, they're engaged, and, like, everything's great for a little bit. He's trying to figure out who he is without demon powers, but, it's all gonna work out. He's human now, what could possibly go wrong? And then by somebody else's fault, he gets powers again and turns into the source of all evil.
Oh.
Um, and he spends a lot of time fighting it. And the way that the source works is it's kind of like its own soul. So it like goes into Cole and is like commingling with him. But the way that they talk about it and the way that like Cole talks about it on the show is that like he's his own person and the source is somebody else and the source is like overtaking him. But the one thing that the source can't kill is his love for Phoebe.
Mm.
And then through that, Phoebe decides to turn evil. They've gotten married by this point, and he's become the source, and she didn't know. And then she finds out that she's pregnant, and I think that's kind of like the last tipping point that allows her to like go over the other side and be evil with him. Um, and it doesn't last for very long. Eventually, like, they vanquish him and, like, kill him, and then, she loses her baby because from, like, some weird magic shit, but, like, the baby should never have been.
Mm.
And so then, all of that happens, and then all of the sudden, like, it's, like, months later, and then Cole's, like, appearing to her in visions, like, he's still not gone even after
Mm.
she went through all of this, like, emotional turmoil in order to kill him, and, like, even after he died, she, like, did still have the baby for a bit. She was still pregnant, and, like, she really was holding on to that and, like, trying to make sure that her baby would turn out good, but it was just, like, pure evil, which is why she ended up not being able to have the baby. But then she sees Cole. She finds out that he's in some, like, demonic wasteland afterlife or whatever, and she goes there in order to, like, say her last goodbyes to him, and he, like, accepts it, and there's this, like, weird worm thing that's running around down there, like, eating people up. And so he's been running from it because he's trying to come back.
Mm.
And so she essentially is like, "You've gotta give up, like, we had whatever we can have, like, I've gotta let it go." And he is like, "Okay, I'm gonna let this big ass worm get me then." And in the process of trying to let, his life come to an end, he accidentally steps into the powers of a demon that had come and was, like, vanquished by this worm, but, like, its powers were still there.
Mhm.
Kinda hard to explain, but he steps into it, gains their powers, and then kills the worm with the powers and realizes, "Okay, I can collect all these powers down here and get out of here," and eventually that's what he does. But then he comes back, like, more evil than ever because of all of these evil powers that he's collected, and it's just, like, it's so bad, and it just, like, from that point on, it's just, like, all downhill, and you keep thinking that, like, something will happen and they'll be able to get back together, and there's, like, one scene that I think about all the time when I think about Cole and Phoebe is after he's come back from the demonic wasteland. Piper at that point is pregnant. Her and Leo are having a baby together, and, like, they've been trying for a long time, and it's this really exciting thing, and Cole comes to their house, and Piper and Leo and Phoebe and Paige are all sitting around the table, and they're all talking about whatever's going on, and Piper's been having these really weird magical pregnancy symptoms, so they're talking about that, and then Cole goes, "Wait, you're pregnant?" Because he didn't know, because none
Mhm.
of them are talking to him anymore, And then they all stop talking and look up at him. And then Phoebe goes, Cole, I think you should leave. And he does leave, but he looks so heartbroken because these people used to be his family.
Mm.
Because he was married to Phoebe. He lived in the house with them. He knew them since before Prue died. He went through Prue's death with them and finding Paige and all these different things. And of course, he did a lot of evil, nefarious acts to them as well. Like, we can't ignore and excuse that. But you watch his, like, face just completely crumple, and he realizes that these people aren't his family anymore, and he's, like, never gonna get that back. And from that point on, it's just, like, completely downhill. And there's no, like, that's kind of the beginning of the end, where it's ended so many times before, but this time there's no coming back.
Yeah. What's interesting listening to you talk about their love story and kind of like the ups and downs and the good and the evil and the changing back and forth of it all is, one, I think it's like a very clear representation of like how humanity can work it, but in the extremes of it, right? So
Mhm.
like moving back and forth, changing for someone that you love, willing to risk it all and all of those things, which I think is one of my favorite parts of like genre television, is that you can heighten everything, but ultimately it's still a conversation about like the basic parts of humanity as a whole.
Mhm.
So I love that. But it's also interesting because I feel like that show and that love story that you've just described has really influenced the type of love stories that you're interested in after that. Like
Yeah. And
similar.
definitely the male characters that I find to be particularly interesting. I think it all can kind of, like, tie back to Cole Turner,
Yeah.
honestly, at the end of the day. Like, there's, Derek Hale from Teen Wolf, and his whole, tortured thing. There's, Damon Salvatore from The Vampire Diaries, like, a lot of them, and I think that there's something very interesting, and maybe it's just from, like, the perspective of, like, not really understanding how men's brains work, but I think there's something very interesting about, like, watching men experience humanity, especially in these, like, really extreme cases where they're not human, and
Mm,
then they're experiencing humanity and, like, becoming human through those things. Um, but I think even when I think about, like, what some of my favorite movies are, which are, like, not of the same genre, like The Martian, it's, like, one man alone on a planet trying to figure it out,
mhm,
and The Truman Show, and Secret Life of Walter Mitty, they all revolve around, like, one man basically alone trying
mhm,
to figure out humanity.
mhm.
And I think that those stories are always very interesting to me because they're so different from what my experience is. Um, and also they're, like, male characters that don't suck, but, like, um, I think a lot of that comes back to being able to, like, see Cole, and I think, like, you talk a lot about, um, how as, like, a teenager, you identified more with, like, male characters on TV,
Yeah.
and I think that's kind of true for that character as well because you watch him and he like, a lot of the core of his character is, like, falling in love as well, which you don't see a lot with male characters a lot of the time. Um, I think you could also say the same for Damon Salvatore, like,
Mhm,
the core of his character is falling in love and, not being able to have love,
mhm.
and I think that those things are really interesting when you watch it from the male perspective because when you watch it from female characters, it's always in a way that, like, seems very I don't know what the right word is, childish? Like, it's
Mm,
like it's expected.
yeah.
Um, and, I think that it is one of the things which is, like, of course, Charmed is a product of its time as well.
Sure.
One of the things that I don't like about the show is how obsessed they are with, like, getting married and having kids, because it's like, you're the height of power, like, come on, there's more out there, but, for some people, that is what they want. That is their, like, happily ever after, and just because it's not mine doesn't mean it can't be theirs, but I think with 4 women one of them could have been the odd man out and
Yeah.
not wanted to get married and have kids desperately, like, it was a little annoying, but, it was the late '90s, early 2000s, some things we have to let fly,
Sure.
but I think when you watch women and their stories and they're tied to love, it's like, "Okay, whatever," like, we expected that because that's all we're good for,
Mhm.
but when you watch it with men, it happens to be this, like, crazy developmental, like, different thing, and, you watch them experience, like, the full range of human emotions because they've fallen in love, and it's like, women aren't just built to be in love and to love people and, like, mother people,
Yeah.
And that's a lot of what you get from stories of women being in love. Whereas with stories of men being in love, they're like experiencing a different part of the human experience that they've never had before, which is a lot more interesting than watching somebody who's written a woman to be in love because they're supposed to be.
I think that's interesting too because essentially the experience of falling in love and like experiencing that is a new part of the human experience. So like
Right.
what you're talking about with the male characters, sometimes I find myself getting annoyed when it's like it feels like falling in love is like the motivation to be a better person and you
Mhm.
should just want to be a better person. But at the same time, like falling in love does make you, hopefully, if you're falling in love with the right person,
Right.
want to be a better person because you are experiencing like the desire to care for someone as much as or more than yourself.
Right.
Um, Regardless of what type of love that is, but specifically with romantic love, like you don't you're right. Like it's not shown in the same complicated way often for women, especially it sounds like it Charmed. Like
Mhm.
um
Well,
so
with Phoebe especially, like, she just falls in love with anybody. It's is, like, how it's kinda portrayed, and especially, like, when you look at her love life after Cole is
mm,
completely done and finished, she dates her boss.
mm,
She dates her boss, and then after that, the guy that she ends up being with for the rest of her life, the father of her children, her great love of her life, they do it in, like, a couple episodes at the end of the
yeah.
season, of, like, the complete end of the show, like,
Wow.
and it also, like, it's so frustrating, especially because the way that it happens, because they introduce this character called Coop, and he is a Cupid, like, like arrows
Mhm.
and diaper Cupid, but, like, he's just, like, a grown hot man, and he's a Cupid.
Okay.
And they've had, like, back in season 1, they had a Cupid before, and Phoebe, like, had feelings for him, but it was a whole thing of, like, like, he is, like, love, like,
Mm.
that's what his whole thing is, so of course you're gonna think he's a hot, sexy man when you're around him type of thing. The first Cupid was definitely not as hot as the second Cupid, though, let me just put that out there. But so they already established that lore in season 1 that, like, Cupids are, like, magnetic, like,
Mm.
you're going to feel those feelings for them because that's how they're made. So, when they introduce this character and he's supposed to be, Phoebe's ultimate love or whatever, you already have that, like, backstory that that's how Cupids work, so and this whole, like, will they, won't they attraction that Phoebe has with him, because technically it's like a forbidden love type
Oh,
of
okay.
thing, is just like, yeah, he's supposed to be a hot, sexy man because he's Cupid, so, like, get on with it, and his whole thing is that he's supposed to be helping her find her true love, is why he got sent there. But then it becomes this whole, like, forbidden thing because he starts having feelings for her and he's technically not supposed to. But it's really stupid in my opinion because the elders who are like the like, top guys
Mhm.
on the good side, like the source of all evil, the elders is the good, you know,
Sure.
whatever. So the elders, like, sent him to Phoebe with the purpose of having them fall in love with each other because, like, she did a good job at being a witch or whatever the fuck. Like, they put her through a lot of hell, and so they sent this guy knowing that he was going to be her one true love or whatever the fuck. They didn't feel it necessary to tell anybody that, so he gets down there still thinking that he's not allowed to be in love with her.
Mm.
So it's this whole forbidden love thing, and it really feels like a recycled version of Piper and Leo's love story because they actually truly had a forbidden love that they were not supposed to be together.
Mhm.
And it was multiple times, like so many obstacles were put in place, and so many times they were taken away from each other because they were not supposed to be together. And against all odds, they were in love. They got together, they got married, they had their babies, they did whatever they wanted to do. So it feels like they tried to pull that again with this guy, just some fucking guy. Like, we don't know him. Like, he just showed up. And the whole time, everybody but the two of them knows that they're supposed to be together. So they have this whole back and forth. They're obviously got feelings for each other. It doesn't feel super genuine in my opinion, but a lot of people actually do like this love story, from what I've learned. And he's trying to help her find a guy to be in love with and kind of like Cyranoing the whole situation.
Mhm.
And so after all of this, Piper's children periodically throughout the show, after both of them are born, come back from the future a lot. So like
Okay.
they talk to their like adult versions of Piper's kids in present times. They're talking to the future kids. So they come back from the future at some point for whatever reason. And by this point, it's like standard procedure. If we see this 6 foot tall blonde guy, oh, that's my baby.
Okay.
Whatever. Like we know him already.
Yeah.
So he walks in and then he sees Coop and he goes, Uncle Coop. And Phoebe goes, Uncle Coop, because she doesn't know that they're married already. And so then he's like, oh shit, let that one out of the bag. And then after that, they just become together
Oh,
because
it's just
she's been
yeah.
told that they already are. So like then like Coop gets kidnapped or some shit. I don't remember what happens. And then Wyatt, who is Piper's first oldest son, his future 25-year-old version of himself is there. And he's like, in the future, you're able to like bring him to you just by thinking about him. And then she does it. And then after that, they're in love and they're together. And it's like, so you had this several seasons long story arc with this guy who actually was a forbidden love because he was a demon. Y'all weren't supposed to be together or ever meet in this type of way. You go from good to evil and evil to good a million different times back and forth with this man because you love each other so much. And also, one thing that I forgot to mention before is after Cole is like fully dead for real dead, we find out later that his like afterlife is him on the ghostly plane watching Phoebe.
Mm.
He's still there and he sends a guy to her to try and make her not give up on love because he loves her so much. And it's all like he's still there.
Yeah.
So like all of that happens and you had this great epic love story with a guy who even in death still loves you and cannot leave you. And then you get together with this random Cupid that the elder sent you because your 25-year-old from the future nephew told you that in the future y'all are married. Like it was so cheap in my opinion and I really don't like it.
Well, one of the things that you've talked a lot about in this love story back and forth and the show overall that I'm curious about is this idea of like good and evil. And it sounds like it's very explicitly stated
Yeah.
throughout. So I'm curious about like how you felt the show sort of handles morality and the idea of whether like a person can be fully good or fully evil or if there's shades in between.
So I guess in like the, world that they live in, it's supposed to be pretty black and white. But because the Halliwell sisters grew up their whole lives until their like mid or early 20s, because they're like different ages, um, they thought they were human. They didn't know that they had magical
Mm.
powers. So because they lived in the human world for so long, they're able to see things in shades of gray, whereas it's supposed to be pretty clear cut in their world, which is why when Cole comes onto the scene and then later when she figures out that he's a demon and, through a lot of time and explanation and everything, the rest of the sisters are able to accept him because he loves Phoebe so much, even though he's half demon.
Mhm.
So like it's supposed to be that he's evil, but I think what is interesting is because they kind of are humans before they're witches because that's how they were raised, to not even know that they were witches until they were in their 20s already. They are able to see things in ways that other people can't. So, like, when the elders are telling them, no, this is wrong, they're like, well, fuck you. Like, this is not what, you know, Piper and Leo are supposed to be together because they're in love with each other and I don't care about your rules.
Mm.
So, there's like a lot of clear cut rules within their world, but they don't really live by them.
Did that feel like maybe like to go back to something we've talked about earlier is this idea of watching female characters be in charge or make choices for their own selves and be
Yeah.
able to defy like the rules of sort of like clear-cut rules that are being set out but aren't necessarily fair or true? Did that feel like something that you were able to internalize or you were interested in at that age?
I think so because and I think within you see it a lot in Piper and Leo's love story as well because he's supposed to be her guardian angel and the lore of like what goes on in that world like changes a couple of times. Nobody's perfect in their writing. Sometimes we say things are law and they're actually not,
Mhm.
whatever. But it's supposed to be that like guardian angel type people, white lighters, are never supposed to get entangled with their witches, and then you find out that Piper's mom was in love with her white lighter before
Mhm.
she died, and that's how Paige came to be because they had a child together.
Mhm.
Um, and so with Piper and Leo, they're very, like, they go through a lot of hoops in order to end up together, and even after they've gotten married and have kids, they still are trying to pull Leo out of this relationship because he's not supposed to be with them, and so I think in one scene where it's before they get married, they were trying to get married, like, under the radar, and then they get found out, and Leo gets taken away from her, and, it's essentially like she's never gonna see him again, and so she's having a really rough time of it, and there's these little goblin things running around that, like, steal her like, she owns this club, she goes out to the parking lot at the end of the night, she's trying to go to her car, and these little, goblins have stolen her keys, and then they, like, literally, like, run her over, so she falls on her ass in the parking lot, and it just so happens to be right under a lamppost, so she's in this one circle of light in the
Mhm.
dark, and she stands up, and she's pissed off, and she's talking to this like, the night sky, she's talking to the elders, and she's like, "You did all of this, you took Leo away, and then you send these things to literally kick me while I'm down," and she is, like, really pissed off, and she's like, "I'm going to stand here in this spot until you send him back to me. I'm not moving, and I'm not doing any of this good shit that you want me to do anymore. I don't belong to you. You took away what was most important to me. Send him back." And she stands there for a minute and nothing happens, and then she just, like she's, like, defeated. She kinda gives up because at the end of the day, Piper's a good witch, and she's gonna go and take care of the people that she has to. So she goes, they defeat whatever the big bad was of that episode, and then Leo does actually get sent back to her at the end of it, and he's like, "Something that you said, like, must have changed their minds because they sent me back." So, she has her moment, she stomps her foot, she gets angry, and then she goes and gets the job done, and they're like, "Here, have your man." Like,
Mm.
so I think what it is about it is, like, okay, there's still rules to the world, you still have responsibilities, but at the end of the day, like, she said, "I want him back," and they were like, "You can have him because we're a little bit scared of you." Like, she did what she had to do, she got her job done, but at the end of the day, I don't think anybody thought she was joking that the next time somebody needed her help, she wasn't helping.
Yeah, I like that. It's always cool too, especially I think, like, we, um a lot of times think about, like, media from the '90s and think, like, "Oh, it's so dated or it's so ancient or
Mhm.
so not relatable," but, there's tons of, like, really strong, well done female characters from that era,
Mhm.
and it's cool, I think, that you're, like, able to access it and be able to get into it in a way that it's probably without streaming or, like, the way reruns happened, you never would have heard about it.
Yeah.
Um, well, that's probably a good segue into my final question for you, which is if you had never been watching Law& and Order SVU and and seen a big old cliffhanger for Charmed and gotten Netflix and had all of the stars aligned and been
Mhm.
able to watch Charmed as many times as you had, what would be different about you today?
I think I kind of, like, talked a little bit about it before, but I think as far as what I'm interested in writing, like, it definitely did bring me into the, supernatural world of things, but I think, one thing that I particularly like is, like, near reality
Mm,
supernatural, so, like, you've kind of the supernatural of things is, in conjunction with real human life, which I think I probably wouldn't have gotten as interested in it as I did and then, like, led to writing all in my head. I don't think it led me to being a writer.
mhm,
I think I would have done that anyway, but I think probably as far as, like, subject matter of what I'm interested in would have impacted that. I think the characters that I find interesting, like, The Vampire Diaries is another, like, really big show for me that I love to watch, and I don't know if I would have been as invested in those characters off the bat, had I not watched Charmed. I think there are some similar things as far as, like, Cole Turner being a kind of similar character to Damon Salvatore and also Laura Saltzman, I think. Um, so I think definitely a lot of the things that I'm interested in now, maybe I would have found them anyway, but I don't know that I would have the same connection that I do.
I think that's a good answer, but I do agree. I think it sounds like it really has influenced sort of your taste overall.
Yeah.
And also it sounds like some ideas of like womanhood and what it means to be a strong woman to you to some degree.
Yeah, I think so. I think also, like, watching those things and being in the environment that I was already at an all girls school, but, we were kind of taught, like you're strong and powerful anyway. Like, it wasn't really, here's how women are strong and powerful. It was just kind of like, you are, don't question it. And it was like, okay, well, I don't feel that way all the time. And I think one thing about Charmed, really, when you watch all of those characters, they are strong and they are very powerful, but they are also human, and they have a lot of breakdowns, and they have a lot of times where they're not able to do things. And I think as women, we're taught that everyone is out to get you all the time. So you have to be strong all of the time. And that's just not possible. And I think when you're able to watch these characters at a young age, like I was, who are inherently powerful, there's no question about that. But they are also very vulnerable at times. And a lot of times there are things that they can't do, even in just like normal everyday life. Like, they still have jobs they have to do.
Yeah.
Like, Piper couldn't get a loan for her club. Like, sometimes shit doesn't work out. No matter how strong and powerful that you are, you're not always able to make everything work to you and bend to your will. And that's just the truth of the world. And I think that is one thing that maybe I wouldn't have learned as early as I did without Charmed, that as strong as you are, as much power as you can have, you can still be vulnerable. Like, being a woman doesn't mean that you have to, always have a shield up and always be able to fight anything that comes against you, because things are always coming after you, but sometimes they're going to get you. Like, that's just the truth. So I think you're told from a young age that, or at least I was, as far as like the environments that I was in, that like, you're just supposed to take whatever the world gives you, and you're going to be able to get through it because you're strong. How do I get strong? Why do I have to be strong? I don't think I would have understood those things without watching Charmed as early as I did.
I think that's a really beautiful sentiment. And I love the idea of sort of like a roadmap of being strong and sort of like understanding the back and forth of it. And also understanding that being strong doesn't mean never falling down.
Yeah.
And I think that's really beautiful. So I'm glad that you had the show to watch.
Yeah.
And to have that. Well, thank you for hanging out with me and for talking about Charmed. I really enjoyed having you here. And thanks for being my sister.
You're welcome. I didn't have a choice, but if I did, I would still do it.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. Thank you so much for joining me this week. If you enjoyed this episode, I think you'll also enjoy an episode I did a few months back with director and producer Ella Watts. We discussed the book series The Mortal Engines and how Ella found the series to portray a female character in a way she'd never seen before. To check out that conversation, scroll back to episode 14, The Mortal Engines with Ella Watts, wherever you're listening right now. We'll be back next Wednesday with Claudia Amenbar to discuss how the hit anime Sailor Moon helped shape her growing up. Between now and next Wednesday, if you want to keep in touch, you can follow me on social media at Marissa Kamari, anywhere you get your social media fix. You can also sign up for my newsletter by going to our website, tandemproductions.com, clicking on You Are What You Love, and signing up there. I send out an issue with every episode of this podcast. And we just started a Discord server, so if you want to connect with me, with other listeners, and talk about the types of things that we are talking about on this show, you can join that by clicking on the link in the episode description. Until next Wednesday, I hope you are enjoying what you love.